Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping straight into a really fascinating topic, the world of South Korean gangs, or Kkangpae.
Right. You see them everywhere in movies and TV shows, don't you?
Absolutely. But we want to go beyond that,
Yeah.
understand who they really are, where they actually came from.
Exactly. And that term, Kkangpae, it usually means the sort of less organized street gangs.
Not the big syndicates?
Well, sometimes people use Jeondol or Jopak for those more structured groups, but honestly, the lines can get pretty blurry.
Okay.
They share this long, complex history that, believe it or not, goes back quite a way.
How far back are we talking?
We're looking at origins possibly in the late 19th century, Joseon Dynasty era.
Wow. So pre-colonial times.
Yeah, seems like the rise in trade, European influence, it kind of created the space for these local street groups to form, often linked to merchants needing protection, that kind of thing.
Interesting. But the big changes came later.
Oh, definitely. The
Yeah.
Japanese colonial period, 1910 to 45, that was absolutely huge, a real catalyst.
Okay, so let's unpack that. How did colonial rule affect things?
Well, for one, you had Koreans living over in Japan, right?
Uh-huh.
They faced a lot of discrimination, crime, so they formed groups just to protect themselves. Makes sense.
A natural response, yeah. What about inside Korea?
That's where figures like Kim Do-han come in. His story is, well, it's pretty wild.
Tell me more.
He was the son of a famous independence fighter, Kim Twachin.
Okay.
But his parents died, he ended up a beggar on the streets, then gets involved with this gang called Jumok.
Jumok means fist, right?
That's the one. And he doesn't just stay a low-level guy. He starts rising through the ranks, specifically by fighting against the Japanese Yakuza.
So Korean gangs versus Japanese Yakuza on Korean soil.
Exactly. There was this intense rivalry. You had Korean groups, the sources mention names like Kumajok, Shinmajak, Shankal clashing with the colonial Yakuza branch.
And that branch was led by?
Get this, an ethnic Korean named Hayashi. It's incredibly complex, the loyalties there.
Wow. So Kim Do-han is fighting the Yakuza. But what about the other Korean gangs?
Well, there was internal conflict too, big time. Kim Do-han actually led a rebellion against one of the big bosses, Kumajok.
Right.
And after killing the leaders of Shinmajok and Kumajok, he basically unified the main Korean mobs under his command.
How old was he then?
Just 18.
18. Incredible.
Yeah. And this conflict, this sort of trial war between Kim Do-han's unified Kkangpae and the Yakuza, it became more than just gang warfare.
How so?
It was seen as symbolic, Korean resistance against the Japanese occupiers.
So he became a kind of folk hero.
In a way, yes,
Yeah.
which makes his later career even more fascinating. He actually went into politics.
No way.
Yeah, joined Syngman Rhee's Liberal Party.
That connection between crime and politics seems like a recurring theme.
It definitely is. Now, after the colonial period, say in the 50s, early 60s...
What happened then? Liberation, the Korean War, must have been chaotic.
Extremely. And you see new groups popping up in Seoul, like the Yeongdong and Chongro mobs. And their initial focus, apparently, was protecting Korean merchants again, this time from Japanese criminals who were still around.
But that didn't last long, did it? I thought the government cracked down hard in the 60s.
Oh, they did. The Park Chung-hee regime came in after the 61 coup.
Right, the military coup.
And they saw these gangs as a major problem. So, yeah, massive suppression. Most gangs were basically wiped out or forced deep underground.
Any specific examples of that crackdown?
Well, there's the case of Lee Jung-jae, a big gang leader. He was publicly paraded through the streets in shame and then executed in 1961.
Wow. Sending a message.
Of a very clear one. Don't mess with the new regime.
Okay, so the gangs were suppressed. But like you said, they seem to keep coming back. What about the 70s? Still under military rule.
Yes, and that's when we see what our sources call the modern Korean gangs start to reemerge, early 70s onwards.
And how were they different?
They seemed more structured, more hierarchical.
More organized crime, less street brawl?
Kind of heading that way. And definitely more violent. Weapons like knives, iron bars became much more common. The attacks got nastier than the 1980s. That's described as a flourishing period.
Flourishing. That sounds worrying. Flourishing how?
They really expanded their reach, started infiltrating legitimate businesses.
The classic move.
Yeah. Building connections with government officials, people in the entertainment world, and importantly, linking up with international crime rings.
So going global.
Becoming much more sophisticated operations. Less just local turf wars.
Which I guess leads inevitably to another crackdown. The 90s.
Exactly. The government brought in Article 114 of the criminal law.
What did that do?
It basically made just being a member of a gang illegal. You didn't have to be caught doing something specific.
Just membership itself was a crime.
Right. Led to a lot of arrests, forced many underground again, and even after prison, known gangsters were often kept under surveillance.
Did it work? Did it wipe them out?
It definitely had an impact. But, with globalization, international connections, completely eliminating organized crime is, well, it's really difficult, maybe impossible.
And what kind of crimes are we talking about with these more modern gangs?
It's a grim list. Sex trafficking, drug smuggling is a big one, burglary, kidnapping for ransom, and still very much extortion.
Extortion seems like the constant thread.
Absolutely. There was a survey in 2007 looking at jailed gang members.
Yeah.
A huge chunk of them, 109 in that sample, were involved in extortion, mostly targeting bars, nightclubs, game rooms, the usual suspects.
The protection money thing. Pay us or else.
That's the core of it. Setting up a territory, demanding monthly payments. We even saw that case where a conglomerate owner, Kim Sung-yeon, actually hired gangsters.
Hired them for what?
To rough up some bar workers his son had fought with, apparently, using them as muscle.
Jeez. And you mentioned violence earlier. Assaults seem high, too.
Yeah, statistics from 2009 showed assault was actually the #1 reason for gang member arrests, about 35%.
More than extortion.
More than extortion arrests, yeah. That was second at 29%. Then illegal gambling, loan sharking.
Interesting. Any idea why assault was so high? Just more fights, or maybe easier to get caught for?
Could be a mix of both. Maybe more inter-gang conflict, or maybe just getting caught more for public violence. Hard to say for sure.
And there's a link to the economy, too, right?
A strong one. During the economic slump in 2009, the formation of new gangs apparently jumped by 60%.
Wow. So when times get tough.
Desperation rises, legitimate opportunities shrink. Seems like gangs can unfortunately fill that vacuum for some people.
Which then leads to another police crackdown.
Always. In 2011, the police launched another big operation, arrested over 120 people in just the first week. It's this constant cycle.
Let's talk about the image, the culture around Kkangpae. Tattoos seem important.
Very. They're often used to signify which specific kpa, which mob you belong to.
But tattoos are kind of taboo in general South Korean society, aren't they?
Still very much so, yeah. So having large, visible tattoos often immediately marked someone as being outside the mainstream, potentially linked to this world.
And there are specific terms like huyinim.
Right. Huyinim basically means older brother, but it's used respectfully for the boss. Shows that sort of hierarchical, almost family-like structure within the gangs.
Is there a stereotypical look? Like in the movies?
There definitely is an image. The sources mention the gakdugi hairstyle, kind of blocky, short hair.
Okay.
Big build, often dark clothes, maybe flashy, tacky suits.
Black luxury cars.
Black luxury cars, definitely. Prominent tattoos, of course. And sometimes strong regional accents, depending on where the gang is based. It's a very distinct image.
Do we know the names of some of the major players today or recently?
Yeah, a few prominent syndicates get mentioned. There's the Bumsabongpa gang, founded by Kim Tae-chon back in the 90s.
Okay.
The Yanguni family, that one goes back to the 70s, founded by Cho Yang-hoon. He was actually arrested in the Philippines in 2013.
So they operate internationally.
Some of the leaders certainly do, or did. And then there's the Chilsungpa, the seven-star mob based in Busan, known for extortion, blackmail.
And how do they actually make money day to day? Is it all just crime?
Well, many of them operate small, seemingly legitimate local businesses, maybe restaurants, small shops, could be fronts, could be partly real.
But the main income is?
Still seems to be those protection fees, that territory system. Businesses in their area pay a monthly fee. That's the bread and butter.
They're not just in Seoul.
No, definitely not. You find them in Gwangju, Mokpo, Busan, obviously, Incheon. They have regional strongholds.
Okay, we absolutely have to talk about how Kkangpae show up in popular culture. It feels unavoidable if you watch Korean films or dramas.
It really does. And this isn't new. Films started featuring them, sometimes even romanticizing them, way back in the 70s.
Romanticizing them.
Focusing on things like loyalty, maybe a warped sense of honor or decency, sometimes portraying them as fighting against corruption or worse evils. This really took off in the early 90s.
Can you give some examples of those kinds of films?
Oh, sure. Big ones like Friend from 2001.
Yeah, classic.
A Bittersweet Life in 2005. New World from 2013. These were hugely popular and really cemented that image of the, quote, honorable gangster.
But that's a dangerous image, isn't it, given what they actually do?
It's definitely controversial. Our sources raise concerns about how this portrayal might affect public perception, especially among younger people.
Like making it seem cool or aspirational.
Potentially. There's even a suggestion it might influence schoolyard gangs, Iljinho, they're called. Kids may be mimicking that behavior, seeing gangsters as powerful figures outside the rules.
That's a worrying thought, the power of media.
It is, and it's interesting, too, how Korean gangs have started appearing in Western media as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the movie Lucy, they were significant characters, and in American TV shows, too.
Which ones?
Shows like The Shield had the K-Town killers, depicted as pretty brutal traffickers. Power featured the Kkangpae.
Dealing in what?
Fentanyl, major traffickers. Same thing in SWAT with the Golden Boys gang, or G-Boys. Often shown as extremely violent, involved in drugs. A much less romanticized view, usually.
Right. So, quite a journey we've taken then. From the late Joseon dynasty through the colonial resistance.
The political connections, the suppression, the resurgence.
To modern organized crime, the crackdowns, and this huge, complicated presence in pop culture.
It's a really complex picture. You've got the undeniable reality of crime, violence, extortion, the real harm caused. But then you have this media portrayal that often highlights completely different things. Loyalty, maybe a twisted code of honor, standing up to authority.
It's a massive contradiction.
It really is.
And maybe that's the final thing for our listeners to chew on. How do we square that circle? The romanticized image versus the harsh reality.
Yeah.
Does seeing these figures portrayed so often, sometimes sympathetically, change how we think about organized crime? Does it soften the edges somehow?
It's a really good question to ask yourself. How does that narrative sit with the facts we've discussed?
Definitely something to think about after this deep dive.